Welcome to Cyber Synapse, the podcast that's creating connections through candid conversations about cyber issues. Sponsored by Agency, with your host, Kath Nibbs. Welcome to Cyber Synapse. This week is another amazing episode, and before we jump into the conversation that I have with Justin, I wanted to say congratulations to him, as this week, since recording our podcast, he has been selected for an Interact Fellowship and is one of 50 technologists out of 1,000, which is some mean feat. The conversation that I had with Justin this week, we really kind of go deep into his article from last week, but again, we've only taken a tiny section from it. And what we discussed this week was the idea of consent, which is pretty well timed actually with something that I've noticed has happened with Facebook and their updated privacy settings. So yesterday I was kind of flicking through Facebook settings, and so I've spent quite a bit of time going off and having a look at what the terms and conditions actually are. And there was a section that talked about facial recognition, which on the whole looks like a really interesting way of finding out if you've been tagged in other photographs. And I think TechCrunch have done an article on it this week. We discussed this in our previous episode, and what we actually discuss in this week's episode is the idea of consent. Now, miraculously, I just happened to have been talking to a number of people, some have been clients, and we talked about the new things that have happened on Facebook, because quite often people talk to me about this in therapy because they know what I do. The number of people that are just clicking okay, and we kind of cover this, is this real consent? And how can you consent to something if you haven't read it or understood it? So we kind of talk about the ethics of that. We go into, and that kind of follows the conversation that we have about heuristics. We talk about the misinformation, information, and how it's presented to us and how it has an impact on us in terms of how we operate as human beings cognitively. And then there was a brilliant part towards the end. Well, I say brilliant. I've had a massive learning curve because I came straight from the gym and the sauna on a Friday night to record the podcast episode with Justin. And what I found is I don't function very well late at night on a Friday after a long day at work and then working out in a sauna. So I actually got to the stage towards the end of the podcast, and it's just to let you know in advance, I and get stuck, and I have what they call tip of the tongue state when I couldn't remember the name of, it was a podcast. It was, I talked about a website called Open Water, and I really struggled to remember the name of somebody. And this really bothered me. I actually considered going home, sending Justin a message and saying, can we reschedule? Can we redo the podcast? Because I got stuck. So the name of the lady I was trying to recall the name of last week is Mary Lou Jepson. And I was trying to discuss the new technology that she's involved in, and I am absolutely, I am amazed, stoked, excited. This is really fascinating technology. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it at the introduction here. Again, I'm going to talk about my Patreon page and the point that I'm making about, actually, I do give a lot of my time to do this podcast. So in between clients, I'm editing, I'm sending emails, I'm organising who I'm going to be speaking to. I record in my own time, I edit. I don't actually have any staff to help me with this at the moment. And there's a part where I want to do more reflections on what's happening around the episodes, around what's happening. And the only way I can do this is really with a bit of help, because what I actually spend a lot of my time doing is, apart from work, is sitting and thinking about how I can make this podcast something that we can all benefit from. And yeah, this is my time, guys. And what I'm trying to say is, I will not be able to do this indefinitely because of things that are happening for me this year. And obviously, I'd said the other week that they're embargoed, and again, they still are. So I'm looking at what's going to be happening for me and the amount of time I can devote to this. So what I'm either asking for is a really, really good book contract, or B, for people to start donating to the Patreon page and allowing me to come back and spend some time with you talking about what was discussed in the podcast and why this has such a big impact, the ethical implications, the technological implications, and really kind of bringing this to become more of an in-depth, maybe academic reflection. But in order to do that, it's tapping into my time. And like everything else, I value my time. So essentially, this podcast may reduce in the number of episodes that I engage in, and obviously this is where I'm going to direct you to the Patreon page. You can donate £1. You could donate, I don't know, £1,000, £1 million, as much as you want to, but it needs to be £5 a month for me to effectively start to bring in a bit of an income to actually warrant my time where I do the reflection with you. Obviously, I'm going to let you dive into the episode. Let me know what you think. Again, please rate, subscribe, share this. I think Justin and I are going to be doing lots more of these conversations, because I think both of us are on pretty much the same page here in terms of what we want to discuss. And I have different reflections. And as you'll hear in this episode, one of the conversations I did have was regarding a slight difference on Mary Aitken and John Sula's work. And obviously, this is where I come from in my cyber trauma theory. So thanks for being really patient, guys, because I've probably rambled on again. It is part and parcel of my personality. And I shall see you next week. Hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Cyber Synapse. This week, I'm joined by Justin once again, and I'm not going to spend too much time introducing him because he's on an earlier podcast episode. So for those of you who haven't listened, go back, find the episode where we talk about cyber ethics, warfare, and lots of other interesting areas. So welcome back again, Justin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm as we've just said, I am absolutely stoked to be having this conversation with you again. Or not in terms of it's going to be slightly different. What I thought, yeah, as I just said, I've got no idea what questions I'm going to ask you today. However, I did read through your article that we talked about last time, and I thought what we could do was go a little bit more in depth on that. But also, we've got quite a few other areas that we can kind of tangent off with. So the article that you did, just for basically people that are listening, is called Practical Human Security. So you did this with another author, Anastasios Arampatis, is it?
Yep, great guy,
yeah.
Great guy.
Okay, so it's quite a lengthy article, and like last time, we're not going to get through all of the content, but the part that I found quite interesting was the humanness that kind of comes with what we do via the internet or any electronic device. So did you want to kind of introduce the article and the humanness side of it? So that was part 2.
Sure, yeah. So we referenced this last time, and like you said, I guess people can go back and listen to that if they'd like. But I can send you a link to this. This was featured on the cover of Cybersecurity Trends magazine this past quarter. Mm-hmm. And like you said, I wrote this with Tassos, who's a good friend. So one of the things that he and I had discussed a lot was the psychological side of our interactions with technology.
Mm.
And there's been great work that's been done on that in social media addiction, in trauma, things like that, right? But when you're looking at cybersecurity, that wasn't exactly the case. So one thing we were interested in doing and ended up becoming this 10, 20 page paper, as you pointed out, was looking at cybersecurity from the perspective of the cognitive and heuristic biases that us humans have when we make decisions, and saying, okay, these biases are there. They've existed for decades, for hundreds or thousands of years, perhaps, right? We can't get rid of them. They're rooted in our biology, right? But if we know they're there and we understand how they operate, how can we actually design around those so we're actually making cybersecurity more convenient? We're actually making cybersecurity more understandable. So that was kind of the general angle with which we attacked the article.
Mm. Yeah, and it was definitely the cognitive biases, the heuristics. So I'm just thinking, for some listeners, I don't know whether they will be either researchers or kind of psychologists, if you like. So heuristics are the quick route to making decisions. So one of the things our brains do is try to find patterns that are, it's pattern recognition centers that actually work out how they can do quick shortcuts. So for example, when you see a table, you wouldn't look at the fact that it might be square, it might have 4 legs. You just know a table is a table, and you build up lots and lots of schematas about what a table might look like, and heuristics are the rules to what a table would how that would operationalize and how you would then define it. And in terms of social interactions, the heuristics are really an easy way of us learning what the social decorum is and what we're supposed to do and how it works. And we learn that at a really young age. So I'm just thinking about, the fact that young people use the internet and young people use devices. And this is where I think maybe, and I don't know what you think to this, Justin, maybe there's going to be some new kind of heuristics about how people communicate and what happens online. And then in terms of cybersecurity and so on and so forth, I wonder if that's going to have quite an impact as well.
Yeah, there are certainly, as you just pointed out, are important differences between the ways in which different generations, different genders, religions, cultures, right, all kinds of people make decisions, which is why I think when we were writing this was such an interesting starting point, because part of what was touched upon, and Tacitus was a big part in this, was understanding the cultural biases as well as the cognitive ones, right? What has been socially ingrained in addition to biologically. And I think before you start to understand the differences between, someone from culture A and culture B and how they make these decisions with technology, I think first you have to understand what do they have in common? What are the biological, what are the underlying cognitive biases that we all have when we make decisions? I think a great example would be representativeness. So because our brains, like you said, with a table, like to make decisions as fast as possible, we tend to group similar information together and then make assumptions off of that, which seems like common sense, right? I mean, we all do it, but that's something important to think about. And a good example is perhaps something we've all experienced, which is we talked about this last time, getting a sketchy email, right, from Apple or Amazon saying, oh, we have your account details and click here and enter your social security number, right? So sent by a hacker, right? But they're exploiting representativeness. And so if they were cold emailing you from a strange address with weird font, someone you had never spoken to before, and asked you to reply with your social security number or your credit card information, you probably wouldn't do that, because that would be really stupid, right? We immediately realize we're trying to be tricked. However, they know that people receive Amazon emails all the time, right? We constantly are getting junk from LinkedIn, from Facebook, right? So they know, okay, if I format this email exactly like a Facebook alert, exactly like a LinkedIn request, your brain, you're not going to scrutinize it too closely, because your brain is going to want to take shortcuts when reading that email. So you will immediately assume, oh, this is safe. This is just Amazon verifying my account information. Yeah. And next thing you know, a hacker has your credit card. So representativeness is what we call that. And like I said, it might seem like common sense, but understanding things like that are very important, not just for how to exploit humans, which people certainly do, but using that from the defensive side, understanding how to protect humans in cyberspace and better understanding our tech behavior.
Yeah. Yes. As you were talking, I was just thinking, so I'm in the process of writing my book at the minute, like I've just been nattering on about. I tend to use Daniel Kahneman as a reference for talking about the kinds of errors that we make, because he talks about we make two, essentially it's like type 1 and type 2 errors that we have in research, but we make quick decisions, and sometimes they're the right decision with the wrong information, or the wrong decision with the right information, if that makes sense. And it depends on how we take the information in, and then what we do with it cognitively. And I'm just thinking this taps into familiarity, this taps into patterns, this taps into what you're used to, and this is why essentially people can be phished really quickly.
Yeah, people are very trusting online. The online disinhibition effect, we call that, right? Dr. Mary Aiken, in her book The Cyber Effect, actually compares some people's online behavior to as if you were drunk, because we're so quick to share information and give out personal details. But yeah, no, it's definitely important to understand how familiar things can seem on the internet, and whether that's because there's an information overload, right? We're constantly getting pushed alerts. Facebook feeds, right, are filled with news articles and posts and comments and likes and things, not just from our first degree networks, but second or third or fourth or fifth degree networks, right? Things might seem familiar because we have mutual connections with someone. So sometimes it's just a social network theory kind of thing. And other times things seem familiar, like you said, with the phishing emails, just because technology makes it so easy to tailor things to look customized or look personal. And those are those emails we get from random companies that have your first name at the top. And we don't even think anymore, right? When that first came out, you could mass email 1 million people and put their name and their address and a personal color in the background. That is mind-blowing, right? But that happens all the time. So stuff like that, which when you start thinking about things like fake news and scams and things like that, it's really no surprise that it's so difficult, or rather that it's so easy to I was going to say difficult to detect, but so easy to slip this in under our radar.
Yeah. Bennett, that was a bit of a stutter. I have a slightly different approach to Mary Aitken in terms of I'm just wondering if you have read my, so I'm now going to plug for a second. I've done an article on Medium, which is called The Polyvagal Portal to the Matrix, okay? And I've kind of used the Matrix as a film to reference. But what I suggest is that because of the distance we sit from our phones, from our whatever it is that we use in the device, it's generally about 30 to 40 centimetres. And what this does is it creates a false safety. And this is to do with our physiological arousal systems and our nervous systems. And it's from a theory called the polyvagal theory. And what I'm suggesting, I think I might have read in your, let me just check on your article. I think you talked about the lack of instincts. Yeah. And that's essentially what I'm saying gets bypassed. So in the article, I quickly reference and I say that if we're at 30, 40 centimetres, what it does do is it taps into this early childhood infant, what's called the eye gaze distance. And this is what babies are born able to communicate. And when they're being held and they're safe, their eyes relax, they connect with their parent, they feel safe, soothed, seen, secure, and all of the other things that feel very, very lovely. And actually, our nervous system can be tricked by this distance and just by the very fact that we're holding something at that distance. So I'm suggesting this is why things get overridden. And it really is biological.
Okay.
So, I mean, not that I'm disputing what Mary Aitken's talking about, but this disinhibition is actually maybe a hijack system. That, you know, the biological system's being hijacked. So
yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, there's definitely I mean, obviously not that I know the biology and stuff like that as well as you, but even just thinking about how much information during face-to-face communication that we get from body language, right? All of these tiny little, these subtle social signals that we all pick up and end up being the reason why it's so hard to detect things like sarcasm and stuff like that over the phone because we can't see the person. So that's an interesting thought. Yeah, I haven't read that article, but I will have to check that out.
Yeah, I will. I'll send it to you, and for anybody else, it's on Medium. But also, this is the whole premise of my cyber trauma theory is based on this this biological drive to connect, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier. But it is this biological drive to connect. And lots of people have kind of looked at and this is kind of what we're talking about today, I suppose, is the technology, and they forget the human that sits at the other side of the technology. So there is a phrase, isn't it? It's the fault does not lie with the computer; it lies with the keyboard operator. When you see like that, yeah.
It's I mean, you can take that in many ways, right? I mean, that can be, people sharing disinformation and things like that. But, even what we talked about on the last podcast, which is that people are biased, and when they program these algorithms, bias is going to go into that. So in that sense, they're flawed, right? In the sense of me not being completely cyber secure or me being over trusting when I'm using the internet. That compromises the safety of my device or my information. So there's a lot of angles with which you can attack that, but I 100% agree with that sentiment. Yes.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that's what we do, isn't it? We share because we're trying to create something. So whether that's a connection or trying to, I don't know. So some people share for egotistical reasons, some for narcissistic, so there's something about, it's why we're doing what we're doing as well.
Yeah. It's gamified, right? It's gamification.
Yes.
How many likes can you get, and how many comments and shares and views. And we all like to pretend, myself included, that we don't care about these metrics and that they're just numbers, and what you really care about is personal engagement and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, we all care about those numbers, and as the science shows us, right, as the studies show us, behavioral economics, we very much care about those numbers, and we very much care about how we are trending online or how many people are watching our video or reading our article, right? So there's definitely some you could even argue demand characteristics in that sense, that we're feeling compelled to do X, Y, Z just because it might attain more social acumen over the internet.
Absolutely. And that's been definitely a conversation I've had with every single podcast guest is, how's it doing? How many people are watching? And obviously the issue with doing it on iTunes and YouTube is iTunes, I have to go and search for the data and find out how many downloads there are. But YouTube, it's there in the public domain, how many people are watching these videos. And at times, I find that I'm probably having my own internal crisis when I'm going, it's only got, whereas I have prepared it to download.
Right. Yeah. That's my point. We all do it, and that's the reason these marketers and advertisers and hackers, even social engineers, social manipulators, are very well aware of these facts. And even, I myself have certifications in social engineering and manipulation, right? And during that training, that's something else that's covered, is understanding not just the interest in going on Facebook just to go on Facebook, or using X app just to use X app, but understanding the fundamental social motivations that push us to behave certain ways online. So
and how nicely I'm just thinking how nicely timed and how nicely steered into the point of why we do what we do online, and this gamification behind our use on Facebook. And obviously we're going to try not to do the Zuckerberg thing too much today. However, I think
we can talk about that.
It's really nicely timed, actually. that people are now starting to recognise, and I have said this and I will keep saying this, social media has been the biggest social experiment carried out to date. And I think in terms of psychology and cyber psychology and just how we learn as human beings, there has been some serious manipulation in terms of what we've done, not knowing what this technology is, and then the manipulation that's happened at the higher levels in order to get us to do certain things. So I'm yeah, which I did kind of make a promise to myself, and I thought, stay away from the Zuckerberg. Everybody's going to be covering the Zuckerberg thing at the moment. So it's although I must admit,
yeah, I mean,
sorry, I was going to say I do like the meme. I do like the memes of him as data.
Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, it's important to talk about, and while there's certainly, Bruce Schneier is just one example, right? There have been cryptologists and privacy experts talking about this for decades, and yes, that may be the case, but it's a good thing that the public, generally speaking, is now becoming aware of even a tiny little sense of just how much information they collect, and to joke and not joke at the same time. To your point. It is the largest social experiment ever conducted, and it's the most meticulously recorded social experiment ever conducted, because they can tell down to a second what you are doing on their platforms, the likes, the comments, right? All those things they show you, but then the data they buy from other websites to learn information about you. So, obviously, I mean, we can talk about Cambridge Analytica and stuff like that if you'd like, but my biggest thing with all of this, the hearings that are going on right now, right, and the investigation in the European Union, in the UK, excuse me. But the biggest thing for me is really understanding the issue of consent, right? So yes, it's true that these websites present very long and very lengthy and convoluted terms of service agreements, right? That we are clicking agree when we go on these websites, but am I really consenting if I don't read it? Am I really consenting if I don't understand the extent to which you're going to collect information about me? If I don't understand that you're going to sell that information, right? And this was the only thing I have written about this entire thing has been about that issue of consent. And really understanding, right, that yes, they read your messages and yes, they record your likes, and it's not just Facebook, right? It's Amazon, it's many tech companies, right, are buying up billions of dollars worth of your information from other websites, and I have no doubt are tracking things like everything from what you shop to your political slant to your religious ideology to your sexuality to the porn sites you visit, right? I mean, the data collection, because data brokerage in the United States is a completely unregulated industry, there are no rules when it comes to what they can and cannot do. So yes, there's a lot of scandalous stuff, and there's a lot of speculation. Will Facebook collapse, and will the government crack Facebook? I think all of that's getting a little out there. I think really just what we have to think about going forward is, do we consent to these things, and are we willing to give up something like Facebook to show that there needs to be a competitive market for privacy-sensitive or customer-oriented social media platforms? So. That was kind of long-winded, but that's the short of it, my take on this whole thing.
No, I'm with you on this, Justin, all the way. And consent, to be perfectly honest, because of what I do in psychotherapy, a lot of the clients I work with are victims of abuse, and that might be sexual abuse, whether it's online, real life, domestic abuse. It can be any kind of abuse, and the one topic that tends to sit underneath all of this all of the time is consent. And obviously we've got the fact that children don't know what they're consenting to, and by children I mean anybody under the age of 25. But also I'm just thinking of the conversations that I've had with my children, with children in therapy, with other adolescents, and I've said something like, but do you understand that your data is being collected and blah blah blah, and they'll go, I don't care. Because actually, until you get to about 25 years of age and you start to, and your brain has fully matured in terms of the prefrontal cortex and how you can assimilate information, a lot of these young people are correct. They don't care, because actually this is what we're tapping into. This is the human beingness of you know, they're using a device because they haven't seen, and obviously I know that I'm quite a lot older than you. I've got a pre, post, during, after internet kind of narrative. So I've sat and I've watched how this worked, you know, paper formats of a consent form, all the way through to this thing where you can scan through really quickly and just click agree at the bottom. And
Right.
I think you're absolutely right on this. This idea of consent is fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental as to what people are sharing, why they're sharing it, what's being collected. And I think this probably taps into this idea of the biases, the heuristics, the choices that we make, and the errors that we're making.
Yeah, we're more trusting online, right? And so we're going to click things more quickly, and obviously, the internet was not designed for privacy per se. It was not designed by any means for security. The internet was designed with redundancy in mind. The internet was designed to be constantly available at any time. And even if you go and look back in the late 1950s and the 1960s around ARPANET and things like that, and some of the theories, the writings at the time on the internet and the idea of an interconnected global computer network, some of the writings were actually directly motivated by fear of nuclear war, American Cold War hysteria, and wanting a network that would survive a nuclear attack so the Pentagon could communicate with Utah, point being, right, the internet, the fundamental reason for using it in the first place and the fundamental design is heavily predicated on efficiency, incredibly predicated on speed, on optimizing human processes. And so, much like designing software and then asking after your company's hacked, oh, maybe we should have designed it more securely. Using the internet, privacy is an afterthought. And so, to your point, it is very much ingrained in the ways in which we approach the internet and our lack of instincts on the internet, because we go on wanting, like you said, we want human connection, right? We want to communicate with other people. We want to be recognized. We want affirmation and confirmation bias. We want our posts liked. We want to see political articles that agree with our leanings. We are not going on with the thought of privacy, or we're not going on thinking using the internet will make me a safer person, right? So when we do get those forms that say there is a risk of your data being stolen if you give it to us, or click here and we will sell your information, right? We're not going to read that and we're not going to care about it in many instances because it's hidden and because, we're so conditioned to just see the internet as convenient, which is another reason why I think, to get one last point in here, I think it's so interesting that there's a lot of discussion now of privacy, because I think finally there's been enough of a sudden shocking force, like any sort of ideological situation, to shake the foundation of the need and the obsession for efficiency, is these revelations about how a loss of privacy for Facebook users is being used unethically by this incredibly unethical company. I mean, if you've watched the videos, right, Cambridge Analytica, the stuff they discuss is mind-blowing. And the second point, that there may actually have been tangible political effects here in the United States because of this privacy loss. I think this is the shock that might force, is forcing people to reconsider that foundation. But the foundation itself is still, like you said, rooted in those biases that the internet and social media and all this stuff is meant for convenience and self-improvement kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, to be honest, Justin, I think we've got in the, particularly in the UK at the moment, the same kind of political issues that there's now quite, and I'm not going to call it a conspiracy theory. There's a lot of discussion that I'm starting to see appear, funnily enough, mainly on Facebook, of people producing videos talking about, were we given misinformation regarding Brexit? And is that the reason that people voted in the way that they did? And are we being, if you like, are we being fed the information that the companies would like to see rather than the information that's actually out there? So, I'm with you massively on this.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, that's a pivot, but also just a clean transition into disinformation and information warfare more generally, right? I actually, so with Tassos, actually the same author, and also a third, we have a paper coming out in Divergent Options, which is a strategy publication, in a few weeks about information warfare as a cybersecurity issue. And, it's just interesting to think, right? I mean, nation states have been conducting information warfare, propaganda, censorship, things like that for centuries, right? I mean, that's been going on thousands of years back. The difference today, of course, is that it's extremely low cost, it's extremely scalable, and it's delivered right to the phone, which, as you pointed out, is 35 inches from your face, or 35 centimeters from your face, rather. And you're going to trust everything you see on it. So that's another thing we have to think about with these platforms, right, is we are using platforms that should fight fake news, right? But, we might have, as one sector of society, or even as a majority of society, some consensus on what is true and what is false, right? But that becomes incredibly difficult when you consider two things. The first is how you put that into code. So here at Duke University, there's the PolitiFact has some of its work based, actually, the automatic fact-checking system, and actually good friends with one of the people who runs some of their machine learning. And it's sort of an interesting question, right? How do you teach a computer to identify truth in an article when you can't use context from the article necessarily, because people are probably going to, use the same kinds of sources in an article? And so do you cross-corroborate? Do you, there's a lot of interesting questions. The second thing being, Russia conducting, we know Russia's conducted disinformation campaigns, right, in United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Latvia, right? There's many countries in which they have deliberately taken over accounts or created fake ones to spread fake news during election cycles, right?
Yeah.
But consider the alternative. Consider if the United States wanted to conduct an information warfare campaign in Russia, or what if the UK wanted to conduct one in Syria, right? We start thinking in that sense, and then you have to start asking yourself these really abstract philosophical questions, which I am by no means equipped to answer, about, to what extent is truth cultural? To what extent is truth relative to a culture? Or, and the reason I say all this is because ultimately it comes back to platforms like Facebook to make these decisions about what to host or what to not host, and how to contextualize everything.
Yeah.
And, in a world where information is so centered on just a few platforms, it becomes extremely difficult to figure out, do we censor this just because it has some questionable statistics, but it's not quote unquote fake news, right? Do we take this offline? Am I impeding? Yes, it's a private platform, but as many people have argued, social media and the internet can be considered a public forum. So am I censoring somebody's right to free speech by blocking them from sharing disinformation, right? So you start, you start going down this rabbit hole, and there's all of these questions, and none of the answers are clear, and they're extremely complicated. They're complicated philosophically, they're complicated legally, they're complicated culturally, technically, and so it's such a concern for what information are we putting out there, how are we consuming it, and how do platforms regulate it?
Yeah, massively. I'm just thinking about in my book I've got so I'm kind of breaking things down into so hopefully it's going to be one thing that leads on to another. One of the sections is actually about critical thinking and why it's such a difficult skill to engage in, because it actually takes up quite a lot of brain resources in terms of time. And obviously we're going to go with the brain is efficient or lazy, it depends on how you want to look at it, but there is something about critical thinking is something that we won't always do as human beings. So I'm kind of with you on if we can get the platforms to do it. But I as you were talking, I just thought, where have I read it? It's in Prometheus Rising, where the author talks about the tickets that we all buy into, and that was money. Well, I think that the tickets that we all now have in terms of our currency, if you like, is information. And I think this is
Yeah.
the level that we're at, isn't it? Is what information do we get as human beings on our devices, and how do we know that that's the right information? And I'm just thinking about what you'd written in your article about something about when we read the first thing that. So, for example, if we had two pieces of research and the first one arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning and the next one at 11 o'clock, we're likely to have taken notice of the one at 9 o'clock, and the one at 11 o'clock, even if it's counter argumentative, or whatever it is, we're going to go with the 9 o'clock one because that was what we were presented with, and that's actually how we work as human beings. So it takes a lot of information for us to understand that something might be it might be the opposite view, it might be different, it might be challenging. And I'm just thinking about, this is what happens in debates, isn't it? Is when somebody presents a piece of information for you and you've got a cognitive dissonance and you don't change your view even though the evidence is right in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an issue with information processing, right? That's an issue with disinformation. That's an issue with cybersecurity. Is we are very contextual. Is the first thing, like you said, with our information, we are going to, whatever we see first, right? We're more likely to remember. Frequency bias, right? Things we see more, we're more likely to think are the case. And the example I used last time was terror attacks, right? Which are covered quite heavily in the West when they do occur in the West. And, even though those attacks occur far less frequently and, result in far fewer deaths than things like heart disease or cancer, stuff like that, because those other things aren't covered more, you tend to have a blown out of proportion sense of the first. So, there's lots of these biases that are going to make us fundamentally approach some decisions in very faulty ways. And, again, that was kind of what the article was, is, okay, you know what, instead of trying to have people go against their biases with awareness of them, why don't we just reshape technology training for these biases? So if we know that you're going to best remember what you hear most, then we better pick the most important security thing and repeat that the most. If we know the first thing we say is going to frame your understanding of the entire training session, we're not going to start by saying humans are terrible at security and you're all going to get hacked. Because then the entire time you're going to be thinking, this is futile, this is pointless, why am I doing this? I want to leave, I want to go to the bathroom, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So we're going to start with something positive. We're going to start with explaining how security is like washing your hands, or is like, so framing and the ways in which you start teaching someone about something, or the ways in which we start processing information, all the way until the point at which we have to, months down the road, even if we don't think about it, then have to recall that information to use it. Every step along that way is filled with these biases. And so, again, that was just kind of the point, was it just made more sense to us. Okay, well, why don't we just design for these or design around them rather than trying to fight the grain of biology and decision sciences? So,
yeah, because you're fighting with evolution. It's almost like saying, right, okay, let's change the way that the brain works. That's not going to happen. Not very quickly either. But there is something about, actually, we have the competencies to do this with technology. And I'm just thinking back to, so I've been doing some GDPR webinars with a specialist, and because my profession seems to be absolutely terrified of these four letters. And one of the things we're doing is saying there's nothing to be scared of here. This is about something that you've always done. But there's been this whole panic, and I think that's another thing that's been created by the system, if you like, that people are now saying, oh, well, you need to be, GDPR compliant, and then people are saying, oh, I don't know what that means, rather than saying, okay, there's something that's going to change, but in terms of what you already do, here's what it is. It's nothing to be scared of, and this is all you need to do to change your practice. And it's been really, really interesting how my inbox has been inundated with question upon question upon question, and they're all panic driven. It seems that you know, these 4 letters, Kath, what does it mean for my practice? And I've said, well, not much difference really. Maybe you need to do this, maybe you need to do that. And people are like, but you're so calm and everything. Well, that's because I mean, I've kind of grown up with technology and I'm not frightened by it. And I think that's what we're saying, isn't it? Is the word cybersecurity tends to freak people out in the same way. You know, they go, what do you mean cybersecurity?
Yep.
Well, what I mean is by keeping your information as safe as possible. You know, that it just doesn't have the same ring to it, though, does it? You know, I do like the word cyber. And again,
you'll get more funding with the word cyber too. So.
And lots of people ask me, you know, well, what does that mean, Kath? And I say, well, if I was to say virtual, you still wouldn't understand what I was talking about. So that's why I came up with cyber trauma, because actually I was looking at the fact that this is not something specific to a smartphone. It's about all things cyber based, which kind of goes what I was saying earlier about where these other words have just disappeared into the I don't know, ethereal somewhere. They've just disappeared, haven't they? But digital and cyber. So what I'm just thinking here, what do I want to ask next? Yeah. Well, and obviously I want to make sure that we can get this in the time. So I'm just thinking cybersecurity actually. Yeah. How do we make it less scary? How do we make it something that people approach? Let's go with your metaphor of like they would do washing their hands.
Yeah. I mean, I am by no means at all the first person to be saying that we need to stop calling humans the weakest link in security, right? You know, Mike Johnson from Lyft, and there have been some, you know, Lance Spitzner and some other guys on many people on LinkedIn and, you know, in other places talking about if you're going to approach keeping people's information safe or having them be safe online with the idea that, well, you're terrible at this and you're eventually going to fail, but I guess we're going to try and teach you anyway. That you have the wrong attitude, they have the wrong attitude, right? And we know from many psychological studies since, you know, I think even back to the 50s and 60s, right? The stereotype threat. If we perceive that we are going to be stereotyped a certain way because of our race, because of our gender, because of, you know, any facet of our identity, we are going to implicitly behave better or worse based on whether that's positive or negative. Mm-hmm. If I think as a woman in STEM, right? If I was a woman in STEM, if I think I'm going to do worse on this assignment just because I'm a woman, if, you know, I think, even if I don't believe it, but I think other people have that perception of me, a lot of these studies indicate that I probably will do, even if it's just a little bit worse, I'll probably do worse just even knowing that that's the expectation. So if we go in telling people, you're going to suck at this is not going to be good, you're going to get hacked, people are going to, even if they want to fight that as hard as they can, we're all going to perform a little bit less optimally just by knowing that that's the expectation. So how do you approach this? That's the first thing, is you cannot go in with the mindset that, you know, there is no point in teaching you, but I have to do this because my company says so, right? You have to go in with the mindset that if you frame security in ways that's convenient, if you frame security in ways that's not scary, you actually do have a great chance of improving the security of an individual and the security of a corporation. And what the heck does that even mean, right? This abstract term security. That means your information is more safe. That means you're less likely to be a victim of identity theft. That means you're less likely to have your social media taken over and have all these ridiculous things posted. You know, that means your social security number is not going to be sitting on a dark web forum somewhere. So there are these clear benefits, and you know, that's just another component. Is that's really the fundamental start, is explaining it in ways that make sense, that are not scary, and that are not scaring people away by telling them there's no chance that they'll do it well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking about there's a couple of social psychology experiments that talk about this, and your behavior changes. In fact, I quite often, when I'm commenting on posts usually on social media, like I said earlier, when I get embroiled in stuff, that there's socially desirable answers as well. You know, that we adapt our behavior based on what we think another person will We'll make it, whether they will judge us, whether they will make assumptions, and we adapt our behaviour to accommodate that. And the biggest, probably biggest research that ever looked into this was the Kinsey one, where people were asked about their sexual interests, fantasies, desires, and basically everybody said that they only had sex twice a week and they always did it in missionary position. And what are you talking about? Nobody has sexual fantasies, because they just didn't want to be perceived in a different way. So I can definitely I've been around some training where people have almost tutted straight away when you say, right, cybersecurity. And do you know what? I think this is what
the IT guy, right?
It's or girl. Yeah, we'll not be sexist. There's oh dear me, them days. There is something around. It's pretty much the same with sex ed as well. That people will just go, oh, not this again. And it's pretty much, we're going to talk to you about this, and that. Health and safety. That's another topic that tends to bring about people having this attitude. So it's almost apathetic, isn't it? It's like, oh God, not again. Do we have to?
Yeah.
But there is something about, actually, this is about you keeping you as safe as possible. And there are no guarantees. It is one of the things that I've said to people. And a lot of people say, oh, Kath, you make the internet sound really scary. And I said, because I only talk about the scary things. That's why. It's my job. It's my job to focus on these things. But actually, I've managed to do, and these are the positives. I've managed to have start a podcast. I do a blog. I've got a website. I've spoken to people from around the world. I've gone and met people, obviously done safely, but I've gone and met people that I've talked to on the internet.
Right.
I've had some fantastic years in terms of the positive side of things. But when I do go out teaching, obviously I'm looking at the scary parts where it's had an effect negatively. So I do say to people, it's not all scary, and it is quite easy to do if you know what to do. But it sounds like people have been scared. Yeah, people have been absolutely scared silly because somebody said, oh, this is going to happen. And it's almost that, if you let your data go, before you know it, you'll have a cyborg at your door, and we're into some of the fantasy TV programs.
Yeah. It's saying there's a lack of instincts in the cyber domain, which I think in many respects is true, that we lack some deep, whether it's biological or cultural or whatever, intuition about how to behave online. Again, that all just comes back to how we teach about it. And so that's why I think there is this imperative, while the internet is used for great things, and even take the case of Facebook, right? People talking about, oh, shut Facebook down, right? Facebook, yes, there are issues with, you can argue issues with addiction, and there are information warfare problems and all kinds of stuff, right? But think of all the social movements that have started because of Facebook. Think of all the people worldwide that have been able to connect with family and friends because of Facebook. Think of the checks on authoritarian regimes or corruption that have been afforded in other countries because the free press uses Facebook to communicate, right? Yeah. Facebook has done a lot of good. And I think, to your point, that's something to remember, is that, the internet is a good place, and there are a lot of good things going on, and it has done a lot of positives for society. But like anything, like medical research, like history, right, we also have to educate about the bad things. That's just the nature of the beast. We have to talk about the dark web and child exploitation and human trafficking and narcotics and cyber terrorism, right? We just have to talk about this stuff because it's out there, and it's necessary that, in addition to planning for our big bright future where our microwave and oven cook for us, right? We also are a little bit, I know you mentioned Elon Musk before, but before we started, but we should also be thinking about the world in which AI can, ruin us. So it's dual use. It's like all technology. Yeah. There's good and bad, and that's just something we have to accept. So.
Yeah, there's something. What was I going to say then? So I was at a digital safeguarding conference a couple of weeks ago. So I was presenting in the afternoon, and it was really interesting to listen to the people presenting during the day. Now, one of the people I'd heard many years ago, and their speech, or his speech, was pretty much word for word the same as it was 5 years ago. And he kind of introduced this really scary world about children doing this, and this. And I was kind of going, that's not actually what it's like. There is something about, we don't know how to behave on the internet because we haven't had the bloody thing before. And it's like I say to people, it's like being a parent. If you've never been a parent before, all you can do is copy what you think you're supposed to do, or you go and read a book on it. And actually, I use this phrase all of the time, we are in the infancy of what this is. We're at the beginning of understanding what the internet actually is, does, and is capable of. And that's definitely apparent 10 years into Facebook. And if I think about neuroscience, we know very, very little about neuroscience, but we talk about this decade of the brain. And I think, well, what does that actually give us? Over 10 years, it's a minute amount of information about the brain. It really is kind of, it makes me feel very insignificant, and rightly so, because I kind of look at this idea of people saying, yeah, but the internet is this, the internet is that. And I go, how do you know? It's only just started. This is a tiny toddler just beginning to walk, isn't it? And we're kind of making assumptions about what will and won't happen, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to do like an intro to, so it's going to be slightly different to our last podcast. I will do an intro to what we're going to talk about, mainly because that's where I'm now doing my marketing, because I'm learning from other people's podcasts. But have you ever listened to Rob Reed's podcast called After On?
I have not.
It's amazing, and I'm not one for saying that podcast people shouldn't talk about other people's podcasts, because I think it's absolutely brilliant in terms of, he wrote a novel called After On, which was about it was basically machine learning, and there's lots and lots of things. I'm not going to spoil it actually, but essentially it's a very good novel, okay, and there's things in there that he then interviews people regarding. So he's spoken to let me see, the person, I've forgotten her name. Why does that happen when I need somebody's name and it just drops out of my head? But she's the so she's been at Facebook, she's the lady who, oh God, Bennett, I hate this. I really hate this. Tip of the tongue state, it's called. But there's a website called Open Water, yeah, and Open Water is a cyber-based digital health service. It's got such a fantastic remit that it's going to do. And the lady who's designed it looks at ways that health can be measured. So it'll use optics. So she was the person behind holograms, and her name has just completely gone. So Rob talks to people about issues about. So one of my posts has recently been about why I had my DNA sequenced, but also the ethics behind it, in terms of my DNA would now sit on a computer, and what happens if somebody gets hold of that DNA? You know, what happens if I get information about my DNA? And the proposition in this podcast is potentially, so say I have a gene that says I'm very good at spelling, okay? And somebody who's not very good at spelling comes along and says, well, actually, can I buy that? You know, where are we going to go in terms of the future, in terms of what we can do, what we can't do? And I would just recommend that people listen to the After On podcast and read the book as well, because it's just really interesting. And then I tend to listen to Team Human with Douglas Rushkoff. Do you listen to that one as well? Oh. No,
I've never heard of that.
Well, I'm wherever I'm wandering around, I've got podcasts on, and I'm forever learning. But the cyber-based ones, there's really not enough of these conversations happening, I don't think.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So I've just noticed that we might well have been talking for nearly an hour. So I think what we might do is we might come to a close. No, I'm going to suggest that we come to a close for today. And again, for not even knowing what question I was going to begin with, this is phenomenal again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you very much for your time again, Justin, because obviously it's now like 20 past 10 or something here on Friday the 13th, and actually the technology's held out for us, hasn't it? So
yeah, shockingly, right?
that's all good. I'll send you the bits and pieces that I've said I'm going to, and obviously I'll put your article in the show notes again, and I'm going to suggest that people go and read it because it really is interesting, and then I might even suggest to you that I do a paper with you, that we come up with something that we can do, because I think I really like kind of the conversations that we've been having. And to be perfectly honest, I can't have you on the podcast every single week because then it would just be the Kath and Justin show. And I promised Gary, who's another person who comes on, that we might have the Kath and Gary show. So there is something about I have to filter people out at the moment and say, okay, I've got lots of others to do as well.
There's only so much people can listen to me talk anyway. So,
well, I could quite happily do this for another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. A, because I just like talking, and B, this is really the kind of stuff that I want. This is the nitty gritty stuff I really want to be talking about on this podcast as well. Yeah.
No, well, thank you for having me. It's been another great conversation. So hopefully people enjoy it.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you ever so much for your time then, Justin.
Thank you.